Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Eliot Malamet, Highland Park Conservative Temple, Highland Park, New Jersey. Joining me, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry J. Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Long Island. We are recording this Parasha Mikketz and it's Shabbat Chanukah. Happy Chanukah to all of our listeners. We're so grateful that you are spending some time with us whenever you're watching this. And we're also celebrating the 30th anniversary of Rabbi Barry Chesler's senior sermon at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. Congratulations, Barry Chesler.
Thank you. It's worth noting my senior sermon was on the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1991. And it was, in addition to being Mikketz and Shabbat Chanukah, it was also Rosh Chodesh. And I began my senior sermon with those memorable words that this was a Jewish version of Torah, 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 since we read from 3 Torahs. Not quite what the Japanese were dropping on Pearl Harbor, but nevertheless, it was an auspicious beginning to that great event.
Yeah, it occurs to me that it's conceivable that not all our listeners know the life cycle event known as the senior sermon. Why don't you tell us what that is?
Well, back in the day, each rabbinical student had to deliver a sermon in the seminary synagogue on Shabbat.
Or
Shmini Atzeret, in which case you could go to Underbird. It was a ritual designed, I guess, to mark the transition of the senior student into the workplace world. Times have changed, and now I think all the senior sermons are during the week. Because so many of the rabbinical students no longer live in the environs in the seminary community, so it makes delivering a sermon on Shabbat problematic, but it's one of the great rites of passage of seminary education.
I was going to use the same word. It's a rite of passage. Jeremy, what was your senior sermon?
Tzav.
Tzav.
Yeah, it was good. It was because I like talking about sacrifices and I spoke about whether or not we can include, how many conservative prayer books have tried to eliminate the references to the praying for the restoration of sacrifices. I myself don't really want to have animal sacrifice as worship, but I think we make a great mistake if we don't try to have the poetic power of what sacrifice means and the remembrance of it and stuff like that. So that's what I spoke about. What did you have?
I had Shmini Atzeret. It was the
Shlomo B'Shlomo.
Solomon, the Haftorah of Shmini Atzeret, which is I fell in love with that story and such a great, powerful moment in the history of Israel and a riveting story and a beautiful character. And it's so interesting as we get started on the Parsha how Torah lives with us. I mean, it's 30 years. For you, maybe 31 for me, and Jeremy, what, 20 something?
24, yeah.
And these texts really are alive for us in a way that is very, very profound. And I think when you look at this parsha, and for me it was last week Vayesha, but it's the whole cycle of these stories. They really live deeply in all of us because we connect to them on so many levels. So I'm going to raise the verse that you spoke about because we have a bit of a debate about that. When we know the story is that it's 2 years after Joseph is incarcerated on the charges of Potiphar's wife's seduction, whatever took place there, and he's in jail. And at the end of last week, the chief cupbearer of Pharaoh made the promise. Joseph made him promise, but the parsha ended with the cupbearer saying he did not remember and he forgot him. Then 2 years later, Pharaoh has these dreams: 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows, 7 stalks, and 7 skinny stalks, and we know how those dreams play out, and nobody can interpret the dreams for him. And the cupbearer, it seems, is kind of standing off to the side of the stage as this is playing out, and then he utters the immortal words, Et chata'ai ani maskir hayom. I recall my sins today. Now, Barry, you took it in a direction that is a profound direction in terms of recalling, the sin. I recall my sins, and that phrase enters into both rabbinic language and also modern Hebrew by saying, look, I made a mistake. I'm sorry for what I did, but where did you take it and what does it mean?
So at the time of my senior sermon, as the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor was also a time of reckoning in Japan, coming to terms with World War II. One of the things that we often forget in the United States is that the other countries involved in World War II, both among the Allies and the Axis, was it? Had a lot of accounting to do after the war, both for good and for bad. And the Japanese were first starting to come to terms not only with the fact that they lost the war, but that their behavior through the 30s and through the conduct of the war was often beyond the bounds of what we might call normal warfare, if such a term can be used in civilized society. And it was causing a great deal of consternation because of the national mythos in Japan. It was associated with the emperor and the degree of emperor worship. And it struck me that, all redemption, such as it is, must begin with some degree of accountability. That we cannot forget our sins, we have to acknowledge them in order to get past them. Okay. A lot of us often think we can forget them and put them behind us, but that's not the way it works religiously.
So I want to say, when you look at the character, then you are giving us a very conciliatory interpretation or picture of this character, the cupbearer character.
Yeah, I think, as I said before, that sometimes the cupbearer might be misunderstood. So it's curious to me that the language of not remembering and forgetting is going to be picked up again near the end of Sefer Devarim with the mitzvah of Amalek, where we have the same thing, you have to remember and not forget. So it's part of human nature to forget things that, we all have lists where we meant to do something and didn't get to it, and we don't say that we're defective because of that. We wish we had behaved otherwise, there's no question about that. But on the other hand, we recognize it, I think, as part of human behavior. So, and go on.
I'm less sympathetic to him. I'm taking the license of, okay, it's a story and I can be a little cruel. Okay, but he drives me crazy, this guy. And Jeremy, I'm looking to you for some kind of refereeing here. I mean, okay. Make conciliation. He's only about himself. This is a court story. This is a royal court story where in a royal court, everybody's looking, to cover themselves, and he's got a lot of covering to do, and he didn't want to put himself out to petition Pharaoh for amnesty for this Jewish kid, this Hebrew. The Hebrew kid is in jail. He asked me to do it. I want to do a favor. I'm going to get on with my life here. There's parties going on. I got to attend. He's like the barista of Pharaoh, and I don't want to leave him alone, and it cost 2 years of Joseph's life. So this forgetting is actually quite cruel.
So
Jeremy, go ahead.
I think that one way to answer this question is, what is et chata'ai ani mazkir hayom? I make mention of my sins now. I think that most of the Mefarshim say, I'm sorry to have to remind you, great sovereign, of that time I irked you and you put me in jail, and I'm et chata'ai, the chet that I am mazkir hayom, the chet that I am, the sin that I am, or the misdeed that I'm referring to here, is that thing that happened, whatever it was, we don't know what it was, that prompted him to get thrown in the dungeon. And I'm sorry to bother you when I remind you of that time that I spilled the jug of wine on your nice outfit or whatever it was. In which case, I think that lends itself quite well to Eliot's interpretation. And that is what most of the Mefarshim say, which is that I'm remembering, making mention of this bad thing in vis-a-vis my position in the court, and however, I'm also going to use that to advance my position in the court, because it's going to I'm going to be able to help Pharaoh in this one way. Alternatively, maybe the chet that he's mazkiring hayom is that he did make a promise to Joseph and then forgot about it.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then I think it's Barry. Then I think it lends itself more to Barry's interpretation that the cupbearer who did not remember Joseph and forgot him, who not only did not remember him once he got out of jail, that he forgot him again for years thereafter and blew it off and didn't pay any attention to it. If that's the case, then now he's saying, "Oh my goodness, I really do have to make tshuva." Then I think that lends itself to a somewhat more noble interpretation of what the guy is about.
So interesting. I want to go to the question, what makes the Torah great is that we can really debate this character and how two of us, three of us can see three different sides to him. And it's all substantiated by the text, which continues on the notion that Joseph successfully interprets the dream. They haul him out, they shave him down, they wash him down, they put him in a new set of clothes. And we know all of that is a running motif in these stories, the clothing especially. And basically he says, look, this is what's going to happen. Pharaoh's dream is one, so he keys into that. And he basically says, look, you're going to have 7 fat years and 7 skinny years. And here's what you need to do. You need to save up. You need to hoard the grain during the fat years so that during the lean years you'll have some stuff. And what is so fascinating, I didn't mention this before, but you have an interesting thing going on here where the Hebrew is giving advice to the Gentile, right? The Gentile sovereign, and I want to say, I'm going to push on this, which is that Pharaoh is adopting Joseph as a surrogate son here. So the surrogate son, gives administrative advice to the Gentile father. And in a few weeks from now, we're going to see the inverse of that, where the Gentile father is going to give advice to the surrogate son. It's an inversion of the Moses Yitro story, later on. So I think there's something cool going on here. Anyway.
So it's worth pointing out here that, when Pharaoh has his dreams, his magicians cannot interpret the dreams.
Yeah.
And the reason why they can't interpret the dreams, I think, what we're led to believe as Jews and students of the Jewish text, is because the dreams actually are from God. They're not from the world of the magicians. The magicians actually operate quite well in the circumscribed world, but the world of God is not part of their world. And so they need Joseph for this. And I wanted to add also that I think, we were talking earlier how Joseph is imprisoned an extra 2 years. How does that actually function in the story? It brings Joseph to the age of 30, which may be significant in the narration, but it also allows us to remind ourselves that behind the story is the workings of the unrevealed God, meaning that God is not directly involved in the story, he's behind the scenes. And so it's part of God's plan. I think this is part of the Torah's teaching, that Joseph is imprisoned for those extra years, not so much because the butler sinned. If you ask someone else, they'll say that it was Joseph's fault because he asked the butler in the first place. Yeah. So I think that, at some point we have to reckon with God's role in all of this.
What you're saying now calls to mind, there are a number of parallels or resonances in the Joseph stories with other passages in the Bible. There's so much that looks like the book of Esther. They're both stories about Jews in foreign courts. Similarly, the book of Daniel. Daniel is one that we don't really get to that much. There's some very big verses, especially in Jewish mysticism. The phrase, "Amaskilim yatziru kizohar harakia," the enlightened sparkle like the radiance of heaven. That's why the mystical book is called the Zohar, is based on that verse. So Daniel does have something, but for the most part, we don't get to Daniel because it's not read in the synagogue, but there's a lot of parallels there too. And in all of these cases, that the motif is not Hashem comes to the mountain and does a great miracle and blows everybody away with the Kocho Hagadol Yad Chazakav Zorantuya, and the outstretched arm of the great might and the power. these are stories that are quite different. These are stories about, like you said, the unrevealed God, and you have to know how to look. Joseph, always portrays when he was back in prison. He says, "Halo Elohim pitronim." The interpretation of dreams belongs to God. We talked last week actually about how Joseph is more like the kind of wizard prophets than he is like the literary prophets, or he doesn't get a word from God. He gets like an enigma that he has to decipher, and that's what he's really good at. So Joseph is that being. There's a person in a kind of sometimes a hidden world where topsy-turvy, where it doesn't seem like it's the order is manifest, but he knows how to read the otherwise vague signals.
All right, so Joseph gets elevated, and he's married off, and I have a theory about that, but I don't want to go into that. But let's go to the scene where the brothers come down. Yaakov says, we're basically starving to death. Go down to Egypt, Ridu Shama, go down there, Vishivru lanu misham, and get us some sustenance from there, V'nichye v'lo namut. And Yaakov says, so that we can live and not die. And I find that very, very significant. Here's a guy that is been battered by life, refused to be comforted, has every reason to want to check out, but he doesn't. He says, I want to live. We want to live and not die. I think it's a basic survival impulse too, but it's got, I think, spiritual dimensions to it. The brothers go down, and Joseph is now the ruler, and they go before him, and they bow before him. Vayar Yosef et echav vayakireim. Joseph sees his brothers, and he recognizes them. Vayitnaker alehem, and he acts cruelly to them, speaks harshly to them, and they say, "We came here to get some food." And Joseph said, then it says beautifully, "Vayiskor Yosef et hachalamot." Joseph remembers the dreams. So I want to ask you guys, you think he forgot the dreams? And this goes back to the theme of remembrance and forgetting. Did he forget those? What does that mean?
Okay, I think what it means is, so we have to understand there are three pairs of dreams. These are the first two, then there are the two in prison, and then there are Pharaoh's two dreams.
Okay.
First, the dreams in prison and Pharaoh's dreams, there's no question that they come from God. And Joseph is able to interpret them as a kind of spokesperson for God. The question, though, is where did the dreams come from that he has in the beginning of Vayeshev? And one can argue, as we suggested last week, he probably would have been best off not sharing the dreams out loud. But I think that what happens now is a confirmation for him that the dreams come from God. Because with the unrevealed God, the God who is hidden, we don't always know what is God and what is not God. We have intimations, and occasionally we have confirmation. And now he has a confirmation that this was not right, because Joseph himself might have thought, I was an arrogant 17-year-old kid. What was I doing? And now he says, aha, I may have been indelicate in my approach, but I was actually speaking for God. And now I see it come to fore.
Well, I would say we all know that the Torah is a supreme, on top of everything else, a supremely subtle literary work. Maybe this is just a slightly, if one can say such a thing, a slightly not so deft, like hit you over the head with it. Like when Lavan does the switcheroo of Rachel and Leah, and Jacob is now the victim of a con. The Torah doesn't say, that's just like what Yaakov did to his father when he took Esau's place. But we all recognize it, and it didn't have to say it. And I kind of wish it hadn't said this here, because we all recognized that this are the people bowing down to him. And I feel like it's just sort of like bang, 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 bang on the head in an unnecessary way.
So maybe it's how we interpret the word Zachar, Vayiskor, we interpret it as remember. Maybe it's something like calls to mind. I want to run this interpretation by you, and it may not be totally substantiated by the text, but it works for me, which is that, you know, he's 30 something years old right now. He's 39. Okay, when they come, it's 7 years into the famine. The plenty years are over, 7, and it's 2 years into the famine. So he's 39 years old. You know, when you're 18, and 17, you think of what you just experienced in your dreams one way. But when you're 39, you look at them in a different way. He is now an adult. He is now a parent. He is now a person of influence and power. And like everyone who grows up and matures and goes through different experiences in life, and including a lot of hardship, the way you relate to, you know, your youthful achievements is different now that you're an adult when you were living in them. And that, to me, I want to propose that as the meaning here, or an interpretation. Vayiskor Yosef et Chalamot means he's looking at them now in a different way. Of course, I don't think they ever left him, right? The same way that you know, we're all in love with the music that we grew up with. I happen to be thinking about that a lot, you know, lately. And you know, the music that you grew up with when you were 15, 16, you know, that shaped your life, and you don't forget that. But I can tell you, I relate to it so differently now. You know, classics, I relate to so differently now. They mean so much more. They're so richer to me. I don't know, Jeremy, you have any resonance with this idea? In terms of music, at least, or just in terms of the dream?
No, for sure. I mean, I think that I think that Joseph is such a rich character because of the tremendous, complicated, ambivalent emotions that he displays. So he calls to mind the Chalomot. He calls to mind the dreams and the expectation that he had at 17 that he would be, you know, the king of the family. And now it has happened, but in a way very different than he anticipated.
Yeah, exactly.
So it does mean something quite different. To me, one of the great lines of this recurring theme is he keeps saying to them, "You have come to see Meraglimatem, you are spies to see Ervat Haaretz."
What does that mean?
The nakedness of the land, the vulnerability of the land. I mean, he underwent, you know, we throw the word trauma around. Everything's a trauma, and everybody's a trauma survivor. He is really a trauma survivor. His brothers, this is family violence, okay? His brothers threw him in a pit and sold him to slavery. And when he makes this, you know, like there's any number of things he could have done. What he does is make an aggressive confrontation to them and says, you know, you've come to look under my skirt and see my vulnerability. You've come to see the land, but I think that he's saying the vulnerability of the land, but I think he's really saying you've come to see my vulnerability again, you know, to, so to speak. I mean, it's not to put too fine a point on it, but you know, to pull down his pants again.
So it's a wonderful insight, because underneath his skirt, it is revealed that Joseph is a Hebrew because he's circumcised.
Yeah.
And
I've been wrestling with that phrase for the whole week now.
But the other thing that occurs to me is that because of what's been going on in Egypt, even though it's successful as a food producer with storehouses that could feed the people for 7 years, is more vulnerable now because all the food is in a few locations.
Yeah.
Right? If it were a normal year, food would be all over the land, and you would have to conquer the entire land to conquer the food supply. But now you just have to conquer a couple of cities.
Not only that, but they're coming down with Habaim, all the people that are coming. they're in a teeming mass of people that are coming for this sustenance.
Right,
Well,
but it's
I
good
think
business. I mean, let's not forget that. They're in it for the money, the Egyptians.
the Egyptians are in for the money, but by the way, I just want to say, you just said, betoch habaim. We're familiar. I think maybe some of our listeners are also familiar with the how's the derivation of a minyan? And some people say, oh, it's what Abraham back with Sodom, but that's not what the Talmud actually says. The Talmud makes what's called a gezerah shava drash. It's a way of interpreting the recurrence of a word in place A and plus B. It must be parallel, place B. So there's toch. There are 10 bad spies. The word betoch is also used at the Torah. So there are 10 bad spies. That's why the 10 is a minyan. But actually, in a different place, the Talmud says that the 10 brothers come betoch habaim, that's the 10 that is the source of the minyan. I like this a lot better because I feel that sense of familial connection and they're trying to come through and trying to feed their family and trying to rescue people in a famine. I find this is a cool source for minyan, but just as we're talking, it makes me think about refugees in the United States and in Western Europe and in Britain. These tremendous, the world has lots of poverty, world has lots of suffering, and lots and lots and lots of people want to come to these wealthy countries. And the wealthy countries, at whatever level, yes, you do have to have some border control. Yes, you do have to have fair immigration laws and citizenship laws, and you have to not be cruel. Our shul, just next week, there's a Afghan family they're arriving here next week, and we're going to take care of setting them up, and we got an apartment for them and other stuff like that. I can just imagine that Joseph, when he says to his brothers, "You've come to see Ervat Haaretz," I'm like hearing, politicians in the United States or Britain or Canada or whatever say, "These people, they've come. We don't trust them. We don't know them." And it's a little contemporary resonance.
That's fascinating. Okay, so the brothers are given a run for their money, quite literally. And there's a little aside that they have when Joseph really deals harshly with them. They have this moment where they're thrown into jail, and then they're hauled out of jail. But as they're getting so terribly treated, Reuben says, they say, "Ashemim anachnu." Vayomru ish al achiv. They say to each other, "Aval ashemim anachnu." We're guilty. This is they're talking to each other. It's such a beautiful staged moment because the brothers are speaking in Hebrew, I guess, to themselves, and they say, "We are guilty for our brother asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho." We saw his anguish. B'hitchanano eleinu, when he was pleading in front of us. V'lo shamano, we didn't hear his pleas. Al ken ba'a eleinu atzara azot, and thus this terrible torment is coming down to us, and it's such a great dramatic moment because there's a translator there, but Joseph knows what's going on.
There's a translator who, according to the Midrash, is Menashe, Joseph's son Menashe, and the name, the Nun Shin Yud root in Hebrew and Aramaic means forget. And Joseph, when he gives him the name Menashe, says, "You have made me forget all the suffering of my father's house." And yet, it's not that way at all. According to the Midrash, Menashe is the translator. So the brothers don't know this is their nephew and that he's really one of them. But the image that I love about this is that it has Joseph naming his child, forgetting, "We are Egyptians now. We do not remember that terrible place. We do not remember those terrible people. By the way, let me teach you the language that will enable you to connect to those people." He wants to forget. He wants to remember. Menashe is a symbol of forgetting his old life, beginning his new life, but he's also the link that connects him to the old life. And that to me is just another example of Joseph's tremendous ambivalence. He really is traumatized and can't let the past go, and and really in the end shouldn't let the past go.
Do you
There's
think?
a slightly different way to understand that, I think. And the Torah emphasizes that the sons are born during the 7 good years. And so things are going great for Joseph. And now he's able to forget his father's house. He could put the pain behind him. He does not have to continue to dwell in the pain of his youth and his abandonment by his family, because he's now on his feet. He has a family of his own. He's a provider, not just for them, but for the entire country. And so it doesn't necessarily have to have the ambivalence that you're suggesting, even though I think that's what I ultimately believe.
I want to say two things. One about the names is, that Menashe, that's the name that he got called up for his bar mitzvah. Maybe he had an Egyptian name also. Okay, but the Torah only gives us the 2 dreams that Joseph has at the beginning. We don't know anything about his dream life in Egypt. And as you are talking, and we're talking about trauma and memory and all of these things, which are such powerful themes, I'm thinking, like, how could he not have thought about it? How deeply how hard do you have to push a memory out of you? And I'm thinking about all these people who have been traumatized, and people, survivors, that when they came and they started to make a life for themselves, and they couldn't sleep at night. They couldn't sleep because of this. And they suffered terribly from the dreams, many of whom, went on to incredible lives of success, but were haunted deeply by dreams and even nightmares. I thank God I've never been in that kind of situation where I've been uprooted, but I can't imagine that deeply there's a deep psychic wound in Joseph, and we just the text doesn't give us any of that, because that's the text is dealing with a different kind of story here. Do you react to that at all, or no? Anything you want to say? So. We can zip forward to the end, which leaves us in the great cliffhanger, right? That Joseph.
Let's just, in addition to going to the end, but the end is recapitulating something that happens earlier in, is that we didn't really talk about the Shimon situation, which is that when the brothers come down, Joseph sends them back with the food.
Right.
He holds Shimon as a hostage in prison.
Yes.
And that recapitulates what they did to Joseph. I mean, Shimon may be the willing self-sacrificer here, I don't know, but he says, okay, you go back, leave me one guy as a hostage. I'm going to keep him in chains until you come back with your younger brother. They go back to Canaan. We were talking before the recording began. It's probably about 6 months. They go enjoy their food. And they leave Shimon in jail. And nobody seems to be too upset about this. Like, shouldn't the best answer have been, all right, guys, we're going to bring the food home, and then we're going to send 2 of us back down to go get Shimon again.
Yeah.
That would have been the thing to do. But they don't. They as they had abandoned Yosef, so they abandoned Shimon. And what happens now at the cliffhanger? Tell us.
Okay, so Benjamin is framed with the silver goblet. We know that from the play. And Joseph says, whoever is taking my cup, they're going to stay, and they'll be my slave. And of course, that is when, and this is, the dramatic moment, the brothers tear their garments. They tear their garments here, that in a way that they didn't even pretend to tear when they brought the coat back, right? The coat, I was thinking about this, is the coat torn? We imagine the coat torn, but it never says that the ornamented tunic, the kotona pasim, is torn. And here they all tear. They should have torn earlier. Here they're tearing now because they really see that it's over for them. That's how the parsha ends. We can't end there, of course.
Well, the rabbis give us exactly a cliffhanger. The very definition of tshuva is to be in the same situation as you were before and to act differently this time. And so that's what Joseph, he's been cruel, because he may be legitimately angry or legitimately traumatized, and maybe a number of things. He may be still mad at his father for setting him up, and mad at all the brothers, all of which would be justified. But you kind of want him to have said, now that I'm second in command in Egypt, maybe when the years of good health were starting or something like that. By the way, let's send a message to this guy in Canaan. Come on, man.
Yeah.
You couldn't have sent a message,
No.
but he doesn't do that. He lets them sweat it out, and he lets them sweat it out with Shimon. But now he's put them in a position where he's going to make them sweat with Benjamin, and we're going to see that they are going to be in the same situation as before, but this time act differently.
Right. So their failure here is that now they've been entrusted with Benjamin's welfare, and that they're unable to fulfill that. And that is very different. When Joseph was the dreamer, they were willing to get rid of him, to sell him into slavery. With Shimon, that was, someone had to stay. They knew that. And, we could figure out however they decided it was going to be Shimon, it was. But with Benjamin now, it's completely unexpected because they're caught from two sides, from the Joseph side, remembering what they did to Joseph, but also the additional anguish for their father, who didn't want them to take Benjamin for precisely this reason, that they were going to lose him. And they said, no, we won't. And now they do. And it's practically, the tension is practically unbearable. And the rabbis, of course, in their genius, divide this between two different Shabbatot, so we don't get any resolution.
So let's
I want to make sure you came back to shul next week.
Of course.
It's like sometimes there's a good kiddush, sometimes there's a guest speaker. This time they just wanted to make sure that
they wanted you to come back for mincha, and then you get your answer.
So nobody look at the story, read ahead. You can't. You're not allowed to read ahead during the Haftorah, which this week was a beautiful Haftorah for Shabbat Chanukah. Give me the punchline of this week's Shabbat Chanukah story, Jeremy Kamenovsky.
I know this because it's not the 30th anniversary of my senior sermon, but it is the 12th anniversary of my daughter's bat mitzvah, not Mikketz, but Hanukkah. Lo v'chayil v'lo v'choach ki im beruchi amar Adonai tzevaot. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts.
It's such a profound.
So I just want to add here, this Haftarah is the counterpoint to a kind of machloket about the proper wording of the second bracha that we say over the candles. So she'asa nisim lavotenu, either bayamim hahem bazman hazeh or bayamim hahem uvazman hazeh, that we thank God for the miracles he performed for us at this time in days of yore, meaning that the Hanukkah season 2,500 odd years ago, or that God did miracles for us back then and he continues to do miracles for us today. And I think that the important message for us, and that's why I say Basman Hazeh, is that we want to believe that God continues to do miracles today. That the central meaning of Hanukkah is that the miracles of Hanukkah are repeated throughout history.
Rabim biyad me'atim, Rishayim biyad tzadikim, the many delivered into the hands of the few, and the wicked to the hands of the righteous. I had my class with my teens this week. We talked about this miracle question, and I brought them. I tell you, honestly, it kind of sounds like a quote too good to be true. It's one of those internet quotations, but maybe it's true. Albert Einstein said, there are two ways to live in life. One is to think that nothing is a miracle, and the other is to think that everything is a miracle. And I thought that was a totally great
like
comment. Totally great comment.
If everything is a miracle, then this is a miracle too. And I can't help but think that this is a miracle, that we, the three of us, can communicate this way. And it's just unbelievable. But to all of our listeners who are watching us in whatever medium they are, whether it's on Facebook or on our various channels on YouTube, we are so delighted, honored that you are with us. We want to wish each and every one of you a happy Hanukkah and a good Shabbos.
And we thank you
so much. And Rosh Chodesh also. Rosh Chodesh.
Right,
we'll see you again next week.
Fill up the darkness with light, everybody.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom. Bye-bye.
Shabbat shalom.